Welcome. Thanks so much for being here this weekend. My name's Ryan, campus pastor here of our Akron East campus of Grace. And if we haven't met yet, love to meet you. Maybe hear how you made your way to the campus today. And man, I just want to encourage you as we get back into fall mode. There's a lot going on here at the campus, and want to make sure that you stay tied into our website or the app just to have kind of a heads up of what's happening. So worship night coming up. There's a movie night for families coming up. And then want to make sure that you are dialed into the Fall Bash that's coming up at the end of October. So if you've been maybe meaning to serve or get connected, that is a great way to do that. We're going to have trunk or treat, so you can make a trunk and put candy in it, decorate it, and have kids come by, and that is going to be a blast. So there'll be inflatables, all kinds of fun stuff to do. And so look for all the details for that online, and I think it's going to be a blast as we begin to dig into the fall and start to connect together that way. Well, we've started a series the last handful of weeks now, all on wisdom. And we've been in the book of Proverbs, and we've been saying that, man, wisdom is just something that all of us need. Whether we realize it or not, wisdom is a relevant, needed, it's absolutely foundational, all that we do. If I'm going to be good at relationships, I'm going to have healthy, functional relationships, I'm going to need wisdom, right? We said if I'm going to be good at anything, like if I have a pursuit or an endeavor in my life, I'm going to need wisdom to actually be effective and good at that. And so wisdom is something that we're all looking for, whether we realize it or not. And we've been really kind of chasing that down together. And all through the book of Proverbs. And Proverbs is just loaded with these short, kind of action-packed, loaded little statements that are filled with wisdom. And we've been looking at wisdom and foolishness and how that relates to kind of the words that come out of our mouth, the friends that we would choose, even how it shows up in our finances. And we've been having all those conversations over the last really handful of weeks. So if you missed any of those, catch up online. And I think those would be really, really helpful for you because they all really do kind of interconnect as we start to understand wisdom and foolishness and how to kind of live and love well. All that stuff starts to relate to one another. And so catch up on our YouTube channel if you want, or you can go to our website and follow along there as well. And I think you'd be glad that you did. And what we're going to do today, though, is we're going to dive into an aspect of life and wisdom that has to do with family relationships, kind of our family life. And wisdom, if it really is effective, it's got to be able to show up at home, right? Like how we actually interact with each other, how we interact with our parents and our kids and our spouses, and what that family room starts to really look like if wisdom is present. And as I started to really study this over the last bunch of weeks, I really started to see this vision emerge for family life that I think is powerful and is attractive, something that I'm certainly drawn to, and I think it's going to be helpful for probably for all of us. And I realized that we show up in the room today with all kinds of family situations. Some of us are maybe in a blended family. Some of us are single, maybe looking to get married, maybe living a life of singleness. Maybe some of us are in the thick of raising our very, very small children. Some of us might be done raising kids, right? And we're kind of in the grandparent mode or in the empty nester mode. So I know that we approach the conversation from kind of all different vantage points. But I want us to kind of rally around the vision of what a family can look like. And this is, of course, going to be kind of the idealistic version of it. And I think all of us, as we stare at that picture a little bit, we're going to make on the whiteboard, I think we're going to find ourselves kind of knowing what we need to do in order to move towards wisdom in our own lives. And so we're going to start off really kind of looking at a ton of Proverbs today, right? So if you're taking notes, maybe get ready to jot down some references. But we want to start by really looking at what a relationship between a man, a husband, and a wife looks like. What does that marriage relationship look like? And start here. And for whatever reason, man, I have a really hard time drawing female stick figures. I'm not sure what the deal is. I tried really hard last time, and they made fun of me. Arms, thank you. Somebody said it. I heard that. Thank you. 2 legs? 2 legs. Should they? Hey, it's my best. Don't mock me, right? It's what it is, right? So there's husband and wife. We'll beautify her a little bit with some big hair. So we got husbands and wives and their interaction. And let's look at it a little bit as we begin to dive in and see what is marriage and wise marriage kind of look like? Where does it begin? Here's the first proverb we're going to look at, 18:22. The writer of Proverbs says this is, he who finds a wife finds what is good and receives favor from the Lord. Right? So he finds what is good. So he's saying, hey, a young man or a man, period, who finds a wife and actually forms a marriage with that person, that's a gift, right? He kind of starts, remember, Proverbs are general truisms. They're not promises, they're just generalities. They're saying, in general, this is how it works. If a man finds a wife, that's good. He receives favor from the Lord. And maybe just take a minute to put this in a big context. The whole Bible is kind of in this big context. It's an understood thing that God created everything, that he made everything, that he created human beings, and he created men and women to join into marriage. And in marriage, if they're going to get married, that they're going to create children. Those children are going to fill the earth. That's part of what is understood and assumed as we read most of the Bible, is this idea that, a man's going to find a woman often, and those two are going to join together. They're going to create a family, and they're going to multiply. They're going to have kids. The fruit of marriage often is children, and that those children are going to fill the earth. And in general, God would look at that whole process and say, that is good. Like, that's a good thing. So when a man finds a wife, in general, that is good. Now, some of these other proverbs are going to qualify that a little bit, ladies. So there's going to speak to kind of the kind of woman that a man might find. Here's the next one, Proverbs 12:14 or 12:4. It says, a wife of noble character is her husband's crown, but a disgraceful wife is like decay in his bones. Ouch, that is rough. Right? So he's saying, if you find this woman, in general, if you find a wife, that's a good thing. But if you find one of noble character, if you find a woman who is reliable and trustworthy and faithful, and she respects you and honors you, and you can look at her and say, we're partners together. She's a woman of noble character. He says, that woman is your crown. She is your glory. She makes you look good in a lot of ways. And even more than that, she's the thing that's going to bring honor to you. And those phrases, right next behind every great man is a great woman. I like it said better this way: next to every great man is a great woman. I think that's probably a better way to think of it. But the idea is just that a great woman, a woman of noble character, is her husband's glory, his honor, his crown. The flip side, unfortunately, is also true. If someone's married to a disgraceful wife, one who's not reliable and is not trustworthy and is not faithful, man, that's like decay in the bones, right? Because the nature of marriage, right, that we are so committed to one another in that institution created by God. If I'm married to someone and that someone is not able to walk with me, they're always bringing disgrace to me, they're always tearing me down, that can create an enormous amount of pain in my life and in my marriage, right? So these extremes are offered. And what I'm supposed to hear when I read that, in many ways, if I'm looking for someone to marry, and if I'm a guy, I'm looking for this wife to marry, I want to make sure I'm finding the woman of noble character. I want to marry well, right? It's one of the most important decisions that we can make, of course, in our lives is to find, if we're going to get married, then we want to make sure to marry well. The flip side, of course, ladies, is also going to be true. If you're going to look at a man to marry, a lot of times throughout the decades here at Grace, we keep coming back to this phenomenal passage in Proverbs when looking for the kind of guy to marry. Proverbs 21:1, a good name is more desirable than great riches. To be esteemed is better than silver or gold. Right? While the lady aspires and wants to be a woman of noble character, the man is going to be a man with a good name. This is what you're looking for. And all throughout the Proverbs, of course, we could see negative examples. While there's not one given specifically in this verse, all throughout the Proverbs, where we hear things about liars or those who are lazy, who are sluggards. My favorite proverb word, right? To not be a sluggard among men. That's not something we want to desire. Any of those situations, if a woman marries a fool, it's going to be very difficult for her, in the same way that if a man marries a disgraceful wife, it's going to be like decay in his bones. But what is a man with a good name? Here's the idea, that when you say this man's name, ladies, if you were to say the guy you're thinking of marrying, his name out loud, that the people hearing that name would hear it and they would celebrate that name. They would rejoice over that name, because that man is a man with a good name. He's esteemed. And he's not esteemed because he's faking it or putting on a show or a facade. He's got a good name because he's the real deal. He has a good name because on a regular basis, as he's following Jesus, he's making little decisions that are known and unknown. And over time, as those decisions are made, his character begins to be seen and recognized and esteemed. And people recognize that person has a good name, right? And their name is literally associated with character and with godliness. Man, in a perfect world, if I had to recommend to my daughters who to marry, I'm like, honey, find a guy with a great name, a guy who's the real deal, right? Who you can trust and you can know that his past history of character probably is the best indicator of his future trajectory and character. So, right, we have a guy with a good name. We have a lady with a noble character. And the idea is that when you join those together, oh man, it's like 1 + 1 = 3, right? They're better together than they could ever be on their own. And they start to magnify one another in this picture that Proverbs begins to paint. Now, you might ask the question, what do I do if I'm in a marriage right now and maybe the person I'm married to doesn't have such noble character? What if I do if the person I'm married to doesn't have such a great name? What do I do? My best encouragement and advice is to love that person into character the best that you can. You know that you can't control, but you can influence. And if you can begin to fan into flame character by the way that you love and celebrate, whether you rejoice in them and help them to know that they are safe in your love for each other, it's the best shot that you have of helping that person to become who God has created them to become, right? And if we were going into the New Testament, we would see that the man is to play the role of Jesus and the wife is to play the role of the church, and the man lays down his life for his church, and his church responds to the leadership of the man and the sacrifice of Christ. And as that process begins to play out, trust is built. So the best thing I can do, right, if I'm a lady and I'm married to a man that doesn't have such a great name, is be a lady with great character. And vice versa is also true, right? I want to continue to grow the name that I have if I'm married to a disgraceful wife. The best thing I can do is continue to follow Christ and continue to act in wisdom. It's the only way forward. So here, ladies, here's an encouraging verse for you. And I think we get to see the interplay between husbands and wives here. Proverbs 31, phenomenal one, ladies, if you're looking for an example to follow. That whole chapter, the majority of it is fantastic for that. A wife of noble character who can find, she's worth far more than rubies. Her husband has full confidence in her and lacks nothing of value. Right? So this lady is worth more than rubies, more than gold, more than any financial instrument that we could come up with. And it's always going to be better to find a great wife than any money you could come up with. Right? The same thing is said of a man with a good name. That if you find a man with a good name, right, more than silver, more than gold, more than huge piles of cash, find somebody to live your life with who's running after Jesus, who has great character. And that's the gold. That's where the good stuff is. I love this. It says her husband has full confidence in her and lacks nothing of value. You begin to see that interplay. That as the woman has character and chases that down, the man is able to have great confidence in his wife. He's not belittling her. He's not paranoid about what she's going to do. And it's assumed that that is the quality of their relationship together. Just some of the picture that Proverbs begins to paint as we start to look at marriage. Now, where this goes next, this really struck me this week, and this is kind of the big aha moment for me as I read this proverb. Listen to this. Proverbs 14:26. Whoever fears the Lord has a secure fortress, and for their children it will be a refuge. That is a packed verse. It is a packed verse. Listen to this. It says, whoever fears the Lord, we talked about this some the first week, and the idea of fearing the Lord, just to review, is it's really revering God. It's recognizing who God is, the fact that he has all power, all knowledge. He knows everything about me. He can see my every action and motive and word and deed. And he has chosen to love me in spite of me, right? The proof of that, by the way, is Jesus. The fact that he's sent to the planet, that he lived perfectly, he died innocently, he rose victoriously from the grave, and that if I believe in him, I can have faith in his name and forgiveness and peace with God. That God, that Lord, that I stand in awe and recognize that God is real, he exists, and there's nowhere that I'm going to go that he's not. When parents start to live like this, right? Because all great character ultimately, I believe, it comes from that fear of the Lord, the wisdom of knowing God and having Christ in us. As that starts to play out in marriage, as we both fear the Lord together, look what the passage says. In general, what that tends to create is this idea of a fortress, that our family starts to become a safe fortress that is a refuge, it says. We'll build our little kids down here, right? That's my girl version. Boy, that's awful. That is like next level bad. I know, right? So here's our kids. The refuge that this creates, the safety that this starts to create for our children is incredible. It's enormous. Right? The man and woman, whoever fears the Lord, has a secure fortress, and for their children, right, it is this refuge is the idea. This absolutely struck me today. That in a world where there's a lot of confusion and an enormous amount of distraction, and it feels like everyone is pulling for our attention. Everyone's pulling for our kids' attention as well, right? Buy my stuff, listen to my voice, hear what I'm saying, right? And I'm not saying it's not all bad, but the reality is that often there's a pull on us and on the children that we lead and love, and for our kids to come back home, so to say, and say there's a refuge here. There's a safety here. There's a protection here. When I'm hearing these voices, I'm loved when I do what you say, when I buy what you're selling, when I perform according to the standard that you're wanting me to perform at, when I get the grades or I hit the shot, right, or do the thing. That what can happen is at times there can be a conditional love. The mom and the dad who fear the Lord create a space where we say, I'm going to just love you because. No matter what, right? No matter what you've done or where you've been, I'm going to accept you and receive. It's not that godly parents are tolerant of all evil. We'll talk about that in a minute. But they create this environment. It's imperfect, right? There's no perfect parents, certainly, and certainly no perfect marriages. But this ideal picture that wisdom is painting is that this son or this daughter can come home and know they have a safe place to land. I was talking to a parent after the first service, and they stopped me and they said, man, It's fascinating to me. He said, we've invested and we've wanted to do this. We've done it imperfectly. We messed up a bunch of ways. But he said, as my son began to go off to college and see the wreckage of what life is like outside of the fear of the Lord and the temptation and all the stuff that's the picture in his mind, he would say, in essence, I know that what you and mom have created for us is the normal that I want. It's a safe landing point to come back to. What a powerful picture to run to and to see. Now, how does this start to play out as we begin to invest in kids, right? If I'm a parent, maybe a single parent, or maybe we are in a marriage trying to invest in our children, how does this show up in our relationships with our kids, right? What does wisdom look like there? Let's look at a few passages down that road. Proverbs 22:6, it says, start children off on the way they should go, and even when they're old, they will not turn from it. Now, I know as I read that verse that a bunch of you grew up hearing that verse, and you heard it taught as a promise, that if you raise your kids in church, they will always become believers. Hear me, this is not a promise. This is a proverb, all right? It's proverbial. It means in general, if you start your kids off in the direction of the Lord, if you know them and you learn them and you invest in them and you nudge them towards Christ, as a default, that probably often is going to play out that way, that they might return to the faith of their ancestors. They might return to the training or the instruction that they were given. Does it always happen like that? Obviously not. Right? Obviously not. Are there exceptions? Absolutely. If you're mom and dad and you want to have the absolute best shot of your kids living a life of faith and knowing Jesus, what this proverb is saying is, hey, start them off early, right? Invest in them, know them. And mom and dad, I would just say a few things here, because I think this idea of starting off children on the way they should go, it's the way you should go is according to their bent, right? You should train them according to how they're wired, and you should mold them into the direction that God would have them go. Part of that is knowing our children. Mom and dad, one of the best things you can do is stop, my opinion, stop and listen to your children. If you want to love them and you want to gain influence to them, look them in the eye. I don't care if they're 4 or 10 or 35 or 55. Stop and listen to them. And listen to the burdens of their hearts. Even if they feel like they're not a big deal when they're little, those burdens sometimes are very, very heavy in the life of a teenager or a small child even. And they want, here's what they're looking for. It's what you and I are looking for. They want to be seen, and they want to be heard, and they want to be known. And when we do that, imperfectly, but when we do that, we give our kids one of the best shots of knowing what God is like. Why? God knows the number of hairs on your head, or the lack thereof on mine, right? He knows all the details of who we are. He knows what makes us tick. He knows everything about us, and yet he has chosen to fully and completely accept us. And that is ridiculous love. And if I could love my kids with a fraction of that kind of love that God has for me, I think that's the best shot I have. Right? It's not the number of Bible studies I'm going to walk through with them and how many times I preached to them, or certainly not how many times I told them they were wrong and stupid. Right? That's really effective. It certainly isn't any of that. Somewhere down this road of knowing our children and lovingly under the fear of the Lord, recognizing there's a God above me as I point my kids upward. I'm not the authority. Any authority I have is because he has lent it to me. Now, it goes on. Certainly, while we want to know our kids and hear them and love them, we also, at times, have to deal with the difficult parts that pop up in parenting. Proverbs 13:24, whoever spares the rod hates their children, but the one who loves their children is careful to discipline them. Certainly in the ancient world, evidently rods were used in discipline. Sounds intense to me, right? But however the nature of discipline is playing out, right? Whether you're spanking or you're disciplining in another format, I'm not prescribing any of that here. The point is this, that if I love my kids, I'm going to love them enough to bring up the hard things. I'm going to love them enough to be consistent with them. When I've said you can't do this and they do it, they should get the consequence that I told them would come. Super simple, right? But not that easy to do and sometimes exhausting to do. Moms and dads, let me just tell you, if you're in the thick of this, especially with small children, I felt like I remember these days, we got 4 kids, 5 and under. We had them, and now they're bigger, right, between 9 and 14. And I remember in the early days, it felt like we were just disciplining all day, every day. Some days were just days of pure discipline. I'm like, this is exhausting. Honey, how do you do this? All right, I come home and do it for a few hours. How do you do this? Right? However it plays out in your family, right? If you're a single mom doing it by yourself or single dad, or you're in a blended family, there's wisdom on how to do it that way. But the idea that I'm not going to discipline my kids so much because it's mean, hear me, is false. The idea that if I really love my kids, I'm going to let them do whatever they want is an insane idea. Love demands that we help give someone what is best for them. In any relationship. That's going to be true in friendships, in marriage, in parenting. Say I interact with my parent, right? I'm going to be driven to do what's best for that person. And the best thing we can do is love our kids, help them to trust that love, and then sometimes we got to bring up the hard stuff and be their parents, not their friends. If we don't deal with some of the hard things that show up in childhood, just like the things that showed up in our lives, those issues are going to show up in their boss's office and the principal's office, maybe even in more severe consequences in the future, right? In this refuge, the Bible paints this picture that because there is love, because there's humility, because of fear of the Lord, this becomes a safe place that kids can learn and grow and even fail and become who God has called them to be. Here's the final one. Proverbs 23:24, the father of a righteous child has great joy. A man who fathers a wise son rejoices in him. Oh, what an awesome gift. When a mom and dad look at their kids and they're able to see wisdom in them. Listen, it's the best gift that you can give to your parents. Right? If you want to honor your mom and dad, if you want to show them you love them, that you're thankful for their provision, for the roof over your head, for the meals that they, right, for their time, their energy, their heart, whatever it looked like. And I'm positive a bunch of us have situations where we grew up in homes that were less than and far less than perfect. But if you want to honor your parents, be wise. Live under the fear of the Lord. And if they have wisdom, they're going to rejoice in that. And I know there's some of you that are asking, well, Ryan, what do I do, man? I didn't have any of this. This whole board, my board looked nothing like that. I grew up not knowing Jesus. I grew up and my house was not a safe place. My house was the thing I was running from to find somewhere safer. What do I do? And if that's your story, you have been tasked, let me just tell you this, you have been tasked with a very difficult task, a very difficult role. And that is the exhausting but critical work of taking the tide of wreckage, the tide of the cycles of abuse or divorce or addiction, and your role is to become the wall. You say it stops here. I'm going to bear up against these cycles. We're going to break these cycles so that my kids or the people that I influence, the people that come after me, are no longer going to be terrorized by the cycles of brokenness that I would have inherited. That is your work. And listen, that work is exhausting. And it is real, and most of it's unseen. But as you strive to create this picture from scratch, maybe in your life, I want you to know the Lord sees you, and he knows. He knows the difficulty, he knows the temptation, and he knows the fatigue of holding all that wreckage back. And just know it's worth it. It's doing something. Right? For all of us, wherever I might land in this map, probably the message is somewhat the same, that I'm going to always want to draw back up here to the fear of the Lord. If I'm a child, if you're not yet out of your parents' home, biblically you're a child. If you're a child listening to and honoring your parents and breaking their cycles or saying thank you to them through wisdom is kind of the takeaway for you. Right? If you're a husband or you're a wife, ladies, you're pursuing a noble character, and guys, you're pursuing a name. Right? Moms and dads, you want this fortress to be built, not to shelter our kids, but to teach them and show them the kind of culture that God would have for us. And it may be the most important thing I want you to hear today is no matter where you are and how this has gone so far, it is not too late. It's not too late. It's not too late to break a cycle. It's not too late to show honor. It's not too late to have a good name become your name, or noble character to become your character. It's not too late to build a fortress. Wisdom, right, would call us to this. And all of it centers around the person of Jesus. Right? It's Christ who changes us, who makes us who we are, and it's his name. It's the name above all names. As the band comes out, would you bow your heads and close your eyes with me, and we're going to worship and sing together. Father, I want to say thank you today. Thank you, God, that there's such a picture that exists. And Lord, we all know that in practice, we fail all kinds of ways in this. But to know that there's a fortress that can be built, a name and a character that can be had, there's a refuge that can exist. God, there's hope. Lord, I want to say thank you for forgiving me for the ways that I've failed in this. Thank you for forgiving us. And Lord, ultimately, we want to confess today that all good that is in us is from Christ. It's his name that is the power and the glory and the true source of our righteousness. Be with us here, Lord, even now.